Thanks everyone for joining on the file management using team drives and groups webinar. This is part of Dido's new kind of 2019 webinar series. It's the second one we're doing so far this year. We missed February, but we'll be doing more webinars as the year goes on, covering a variety of topics. So kind of keep an eye out for that. Some of those will be admin oriented, some will be end user oriented, and we'll be clear about who the intended audience is for our future sessions. For those who haven't met me, and I do see a lot of familiar faces in the attendees list here, so hello to everyone who has. But for those who haven't met me, my name's Evan. I'm the G Suite team lead here at Dido. For those who are not a current customer of ours, we're a premier partner for G Suite, Google Cloud Platform, Google Maps, and Chrome. So I'll go into a little bit of background on who Dido is while I'm opening up the conversation here. Today, we're very much talking about team drives, which is included in the G Suite Business and Enterprise version. So I'll give a little bit more detail there. My role here is to work with our professional services team and our sales team to ensure that our customers have good information and education around the products and the offerings in G Suite. So if you do have any questions, please feel free to chat those into the webinar window. I am going to be keeping an eye on those. Let's see. Okay, and I saw that there was already a question, which I think I've now addressed. So that being said, please feel free to ask questions kind of throughout the conversation, and I will be happy to address. Jumping right into it here. I want to start off with a little bit about who Dido is. So for those existing customers, this might be a little bit of repetition, but we are kind of a full stack Google Cloud partner. We're one of the only premier partners out there that are all Google. So for all questions about things G Suite, Google Cloud Platform, Chrome, and Maps oriented, please feel free to come to our website and schedule a consult to work with our engineers and our sales team to kind of resolve those questions around what technology is available and how to adopt those things. Jumping into today's agenda, there's really going to be kind of three main topics here. I'm going to open up with some kind of what's new highlights about what's already rolled out in G Suite this year, kind of highlighting some of the biggest updates that have come in February. The main topic and the bulk of our time will be on file management and control with team drives. And then I'm going to do kind of we're trying out some new things with our webinars, and the one that we wanted to try this go around is a use case of the month. And the use case that I'm going to show is using the Explore function to understand Google Sheets data. Which is a pretty convenient way to visualize, understand, and work within Sheets without needing to write out a lot of functions and things to generate pivot tables and visualizations. It's a really quick time saver that I use all the time, and I wanted to share it with our customers as well. And then Q&A I kind of have marked last, but please feel free to ask questions through the chat during the conversation, and I'll keep an eye on those, but if there's something that's relevant, I'll try to answer right away. Otherwise, when we get to the end, we'll be able to answer questions and things as well. So quick plug here to recommend signing up for the G Suite Updates blog if you haven't already. This is a phenomenal tool to kind of see and understand what features are rolling out and how they can be leveraged. Google actually addresses change management and communications when rolling out new features. So seeing who's going to be impacted and how to communicate with them is a big part of what this updates blog brings to admins. Google also frequently uses this to look for beta signups for upcoming features. So if you do want to become an early adopter, this is probably the best way to get started with that. Some of the early adopter programs that are going right now are Gmail Confidential mode, which allows you to secure your emails when you're sending to recipients both within and outside of your domain. Another one that's currently available is pin code sharing, which allows you, when you're sharing externally, to generate a pin code in Google Drive so that the external collaborator has to authenticate in using a pin code in order to view or comment or edit any of the information in a document. And that pin code actually identifies who that person was assigned to or who that pin code was assigned to. So if you collaborate with any other organizations that don't use G Suite, it's a little bit challenging to share to them directly, that pin code sharing is going to roll out to all customers later in the year. But if you want to get into that, early adopters, you can sign up through the updates blog for that one. The other thing I want to mention, there have been, or in February, there were 23 significant G Suite updates, and we are on track to see a similar amount virtually every month this year. So I'm going to be talking about the top 5 updates that came from February during this presentation, but during the webinar series, and if you guys attend future sessions, we'll always go through the previous month. And in addition, the G Suite Updates blog does a recap each month. So if you want to go take a look at what came in February, you can do so, and there will be a new recap for March in the next couple of days. So great resource, wanted to plug that one right in the beginning. So kicking it off here, the first major update that released to G Suite in February that I want to talk about is the spelling and grammar improvements in Google Docs. The grammar improvements here are underline possible grammar corrections in blue. So that you can see suggested corrections or dismiss those alerts just with a right click. You can also see the grammar errors when you're running a spelling and grammar check through the tools menu. What's really cool about this is, compared to a lot of the other providers in the market that do grammar corrections, this is meaning and intent-based. Google's artificial intelligence and machine learning is really good about understanding language at a greater level of complexity than simple literal grammar, which is very much what you would see from other kind of legacy tools. Doesn't make sense grammatically is not the only thing that Google's checking. Common grammar mistakes, understanding when there might be multiple meanings based on different utilizations of grammar are all included here. So it's a really, really easy tool to get started with, and actually a lot of users may have already automatically started seeing these improvements. Particularly useful if you have users who are a little bit unprofessional in their writing, who could use a boost, or potentially English second language or not English primary language speakers who are looking to kind of tighten up their spelling and grammar. The next feature I wanted to talk about that rolled out last month is the Gmail right-click context menu. If you're using the new Gmail, which at this point I hope that everybody is, you can actually use a right-click context menu in your Gmail box to handle emails more quickly. So the really common features that I've been using out of this one, you can do main page without clicking into an email. You can reply or forward an email. You can search for emails from that sender. You can search for all emails with the same subject if you're not using conversation view. So you can kind of replicate a conversation view without needing to give up that classic kind of preview pane and unthreaded interface. You can also open multiple emails in multiple new windows at the same time. So if you check multiple emails and then right click and open a new window, you can open multiple or add labels here. So it's just a nice little efficiency booster within the Gmail box for those that are leveraging that to kind of work through your email a little bit more quickly. Google's market research from last year showed that the average information worker spent about 8 to 12 hours per week working on email. So anything to work through that a little bit faster is a good feature in my book. The next one that I want to talk about is very much admin oriented. So this new endpoint verification rolled out last month that gives admins control over how devices can access corporate data in G Suite. Specifically, using a Chrome browser extension, you can tag endpoint devices as approved or blocked, and then you can configure access context around that. You can even set up device approval so that users must be on an approved device in order to access their G Suite. This brings kind of a similar functionality to what's already currently available in mobile device management to devices using a Chrome browser to access their G Suite information. This goes along with some of Google's plans that I'm sure we'll hear more about at the annual Google Cloud Next event in a couple of weeks around Google advancing their device management offerings. And this is a really big step in that right direction for organizations that want to provide devices to their end users and prevent them from accessing from unapproved personal devices. Next one I want to touch on is intelligent search in Google Drive. If you run a search in Google Drive, you can actually probably already see this today. The intelligent search just surfaces for you suggested search queries based on previous searches and a lot of other signals that Google's AI in the background is interpreting. It does list your top collaborators, so if you know you were working on a doc with someone else, you can just click their name and it'll show you the docs that you have in common. And then some of the quick file types, edit histories, priority items, and more will show up there, as well as kind of highlighted criteria down at the bottom. So where it says PDFs, documents, presentations, things like that. The statistic on simply looking for and consolidating information for information workers from last year is like 2 to 8 hours per week for information workers. So again, anywhere that faster searching and more intelligence built into the platform can save employees time throughout the day is something I really encourage admins to help their teams to engage with and start utilizing. So intelligent search in Google Drive is a pretty cool one. The final update that I wanted to touch on today as kind of a major update is priority in Google Drive. For anyone who is super familiar with the rollout calendar, this one did roll out in March, so I am jumping the gun there a little bit. But priority just rolled out to Google Drive. I've already gotten started using it, and it is awesome. Priority does really two kind of main big things. The first one is the priority section at the top. It surfaces the documents that Google thinks are most relevant to you right now using machine learning oriented suggestions based on various signals from your activity. And on each suggested document, you can take actions in line without navigating into the doc itself, waiting for the doc to load in a new tab. So things like replying to a comment or reviewing recent edits to a document, you can do within the Drive interface. I've been very excited about this one for a while, and that priority section is another great way to basically create a dashboard in Google Drive that helps users become more efficient without needing any additional configurations, additional work to get that going. Workspaces is the second section that is a part of this priority in Google Drive. By the way, you can get to priority by navigating in Drive in the top left corner where priority is blue highlighted. If it's enabled for your domain, that's where it should show up. If it hasn't rolled out to your domain yet, depending on your release schedule, this one came out in the last week, so you might start seeing it in the next couple of days. But that second section that priority brings is the workspaces. So in workspaces, you see intelligent suggestions of related content to group together for easier access. So it'll automatically take multiple files related to the same projects or same clients or same common thread, and it'll group them for you. And then you can also create your own workspaces, collect files that you have access to that are stored in My Drive and folders and team drives. And then you can group them in the workspaces and then write or just by going to the file, going right-click, add to workspace, and selecting the workspace you want to add it to. So again, this is like pre-filling in your searches. So when you want to access documents later, a lot of the time people navigate this using a file and folder structure or using bookmarks. And without cluttering your other workflows, this builds it right into the Google Drive interface natively. And for anyone who is seeing it in their domain already, what I'm doing and what I recommend to all my customers is just set the priority section to your homepage for a week. See if you get any mileage or utilization out of it. And I can say that I already am, but and I'm confident that others will. But that kind of can help you get into the swing of introducing the new technology into your workflows by using that as your dashboard for the week. Cool. So jumping into the main topic today, what we're here to discuss primarily is using team drives, doing enterprise file storage and sharing, what the security implications there are, and really what Google is bringing to enterprise storage, sharing, collaboration. So team drives, for those who are not familiar, is an additional section in Google Drive that is system owned instead of individual user owned. For anyone who's leveraging G Suite Basic, this tool, the Team Drives tool, is only available on the business and enterprise version. So just be advised that you do need to be on that higher version to leverage that. I saw that there were starting to be a couple of questions coming through, and I will definitely be able to address those a little bit later on. But for right now, so Team Drives basically allows you to set up, in a way, organizational file shares that are owned by a system instead of an individual end user. The really common use cases for team drives, actually the original intent was for project teams, for people who are involved in the same project, who need an easy place to share assets. You set the permissions at the team drive level, and then whenever you drop an asset into that team drive, create a folder, or make any organizational kind of changes, it automatically kind of pushes that out to the participants, and everyone gets access to those things. Also really great for events. If you have a specific event or deliver date, team drives are a really great way to create a collaborative workspace and then work together on that. Let's see. So that primary use case of allowing end users to put together their own collaborative space using team drives was kind of the original intent from Google, and it was a tool that they developed based on the need of their existing employees. Now, when this made it to the market, what organizations, what partners, what customers identified very quickly is that, oh, system-owned files are a really great way to set up organizational file shares. So for creating template folders, for creating company-wide file access, setting up security on sensitive file folders, even creating team-wide or departmental shared spaces to share documents. Team Drives actually works really well for those use cases because the files that are in a Team Drive actually transcend the individual user. As people come and go, you don't actually need to go back through all your team drives and reshare everything out and kind of manually and super granularly manage your permissions, because the team drive continues to exist in absence of the end user. So as people come and go, all of the data that they have in the team drive stays static. So we can actually then, and this is kind of part two of today's webinar, we can use groups to actually even automate out that process a little bit. But from the team drive level, being able to set up that organizational file share is a really powerful tool that's kind of brought by this feature. One thing I do want to touch on just before we go too much further is one best practice that we're seeing in the marketplace that we just want our customers to be aware of our recommendations for, which is how do we manage external file sharing? Now, as this relates to team drives, you can set permissions around whether or not a team drive can go internal only or external. But more generally speaking, For your My Drive type environment, we actually do recommend in a lot of cases allowing your users to share externally. The reason for that is when you share externally in Google Drive, you retain audit information, you retain governance, you can always modify or retract access at a later date. You can protect your files and folders, you can protect your team drives in other ways that if you turn off external sharing, what do your end users end up doing? Well, they're going to download it and then attach it to an email and send it to their recipient, which allows that data to exfiltrate your Drive environment. So from a security standpoint and from an administrative standpoint, it's really important to be aware of that potential risk and have good policies in place so that users understand if, for example, they're using a team drive that doesn't allow external sharing, they should not email that information either because that is deliberate. Whereas in their My Drive or in another team drive that's designed for external sharing, that's where that type of external file sharing should go on with clients. So there really is kind of that extra piece to consider there when you're thinking about external sharing. And team drives give you a lot more granular controls and how you can manage the data that's being shared externally via Google Drive. And then one additional note on the sensitive files. There is a status that I'll go into a little bit later on called a protected team drive that doesn't allow downloading, copying, or sharing of a document. As far as I'm aware, with current technology today, there's not really a way to prevent people from snapping a picture with their phone of a document that you've shared with them. But at the very least, creating that kind of protected team drive space prevents them from being able to easily reuse any assets that you share via a protected team drive. So for external file sharing, there's that additional layer of protection offered by team drives that's really, really useful when you're sharing proprietary information or marketing assets, things that other organizations might take a look at and say, oh, file, make a copy. You can actually prevent them from doing that at a team drive level. So that is very useful. So jumping forward, I'm actually going to go into a demo here. Now, I looked through the attendee list before the session today, and I know we have majority of the attendees are very much in the IT profession, IT managers, directors, but we do have some users who are in either business roles or end user roles, and I want to communicate clearly that the first part of my demo today is going to be end user facing. But then I am going to navigate to the admin console. So if anything is a little bit too technical, I apologize in advance once we reach that admin section. You are recommended to escalate any questions you have about team drives to your admins, schedule consults with myself and with the Dido team to address those use cases if there's any configurations that need to go on from an admin side to turn on some of these features and give you what you need to truly leverage team drives. But just so I'm communicating kind of the path here, I'm going to start at the end user level and then work my way up to the admin level, which is a little bit reverse from how we usually go about things. And that's just because I do want to make sure that the content here is as relevant as possible to all of our attendees. So I'm actually jumping out of our presentation here, and I'm going to head into the Google Drive environment. So what I have here is actually my regular kind of My Drive environment, and Team Drives represents an additional section in the top left corner. If I expand these, I can see all of my team drives even from this home menu. But for the sake of today and for demoing, I'm really going to go into detail here on what the team drives do. Quick note on a couple of the questions that we've received so far. There's a question about G Suite certification. I can definitely address that toward the end, so I'll come back there. Will Google ever provide granular permissions in Google Team Drives? Yes. I'll go into detail on that later on. Some questions about file stream, which I will talk about a little bit later on. So I think we have great questions coming through. Definitely please continue to ask those questions. And when we get a little bit when we get toward the end, I think I'll want to address most of these. But just so you know, your questions are coming through, and I will be able to answer those. So returning to our Team Drives environment very quickly, again, Team Drives can be used for projects. So if I have Project X is going to be kind of my main example that I'm using here today, but also great for departmental sharing, great for company-wide sharing. There's a ton of use cases for Team Drives that make it favorable to the traditional kind of My Drive environment. Making sure that you set, for example, in our company-wide Team Drive, we can set a permission that says that our HR team can modify, but everyone else can just view and comment. And that way, when we have those shared assets, only the people who have authorization have the ability to modify, and it's just really, really easy to get shared out to everyone who needs it. So diving into the kind of project use case, or actually, I'll even back up there and say, let's start by creating a new Team Drive. So I'm going to call this Project Y, and we have Project X already existing there. So I'll return to that in a bit. When we create Project Y, it really just takes a couple of seconds to create a new Team Drive, and then go in and start adding members to that Team Drive. The permissions that you can set for your new members in Team Drives is a little bit different than with the traditional My Drive kind of hierarchy. And again, that's just because the owner of the Team Drive is the system, not the individual end user. So whenever you create an asset in My Drive, it belongs to the user account that creates that asset. Whenever you create an asset in a Team Drive, it belongs to the system. So from the end user standpoint, creating and sharing out a new Team Drive is really simple, really straightforward. You have a manager role. These are basically the owners that can change the settings and the sharing permissions on the Team Drive. You have your content managers who should be able to add, edit, move, and delete files. You have your contributors that can add and edit files, but they can't reorganize or delete. And then you have commenters and viewers, which very much follows the same level of access that you would see in the traditional kind of My Drive structure. So from the permissions standpoint, once we've added in our team members and set up the Team Drive how we want to, we can start creating folders and adding content to this Team Drive. One note, and I saw that there was a question about it, the ability to create folders in Team Drives currently is an organizational benefit for storing files in a rational, coherent folder. It actually does not currently allow you to change the permissions on a specific folder and have that override the Team Drive. So, and I know that's the complex way of saying the permissions for a whole Team Drive are set at the Team Drive level, not at the folder level today. Google has signaled to the marketplace that they're working on that subfolder sharing. So we do expect that to come a little bit later this year. And then going a layer deeper, you can actually set permissions at the document level. So if I create Project Y, Document 1, name that document and say, just add a little bit of text to it so that it kind of propagates within the Team Drive a little bit faster. Once I add that document in here, it will show up underneath my Team Drive, and then I can move it into the folder from an organizational standpoint. But you actually can override the permissions on the Team Drive at the file level. So if there are certain subfiles that need to be shared out to specific people who don't need access to the whole Team Drive, you actually can still do that. But if you want to create a folder structure that has different levels of access and security at all of the different layers, we would actually recommend creating a separate Team Drive or continuing to use My Drive for those specific users who need different access than the Team Drive itself. And again, the message that I'll send there is that we know that it's coming later this year based on Google's public roadmap. So we are hoping to get a little bit of an updated timeline from that at their annual Google Cloud Next event in a couple of weeks. But at the time being, we know that that's coming. Just not exactly when. So from the end user level, you can create and manage team drives if your administrators have that enabled for your domain. But if you do want to leverage team drives as more of an organizational file share, and not really allow the end users to create their own team drives, you actually can do that. So end users, this is where I'm going to jump into the admin console and do a little bit more of complexity at the admin level. So definitely feel free to check some email if this is outside your realm of relevancy or expertise. So from an admin standpoint, and I suspect I'm going to have to re-authenticate in here as soon as I click a button, but from an admin level, Team Drives is managed in the same location as Google Drive and Docs. So I was right about that re-auth, but that hopefully won't happen again during our demo. So from the hamburger menu in the top left, we can actually just go into Apps, G Suite, and then Drive and Docs to manage our Team Drive settings. The first thing that we want to think about when we're considering deploying team drives is whether or not we want end users to create their own team drives. We can actually set team drive creation on or off at the end or at the OU level. We can prevent users from creating new team drives. We can set some more granular permissions about exactly what level of permission each of those users in our team drives have. And again, that's set at the OU level. So if only the IT team should be able to create new team drives, you can set that parameter using OUs. That is actually really common even for organizations that want their end users to be able to do those two use cases I mentioned for kind of quick and nimble team drives, which is projects and events. The reason you might turn off the ability to create team drives, but then still allow users to request that the IT team create a team drive for them is that if you allow end users to create their own team drives, two things could happen. There's two additional risks with that. One is that the team drives could become extremely cluttered and difficult to navigate. And two, if you're allowing the end users to manage the permissions on the team drives, they're probably not going to do it in a scalable way. So as end users come and go, their team drives permissions might not stay up to date at the same level and at the same degree of capability as the admins are delivering here. So again, one of the themes of today is using groups to share out team drives permissions. I am going to go into a lot of detail there. And end users don't really have the capability to manage your admin managed groups. They don't necessarily have the experience or the know-how to ensure that your file and folder identity access management is going the way that it's supposed to. So when you are sharing out to a team drive, it is the best practice to use a group whenever possible instead of sharing out to the individual users. And that way, when someone leaves the organization, you can add their manager or their replacement to the groups that they were a part of, and they'll automatically gain access to all of the team drives that that user had access to, rather than needing to go through every single team drive and reshare those out to the new collaborators. So that's the kind of quick overview of this team drive creation feature and how some of the considerations that you might want to take into account there. Again, a lot of organizations want their end users to be able to create team drives because it is a quick and agile way to get in and start sharing assets, and it can enable better collaboration. But please feel free to reach out for a consultation if you have any questions about specific use cases that we might be able to assist with. Now, from a team drives management, there's actually a second section within Drive and Docs, if you're on the G Suite, business or enterprise versions, called Manage Team Drives. Manage Team Drives will actually give you an overview of all of the team drives that exist within your domain, and it allows you to actually manage the permissions for those team drives. So if I click into a team drive, I can see the current memberships, I can add members, I can delete existing members or change their levels of access. So team drives does give you some additional administrative controls that you might not have in the traditional My Drive hierarchy for setting parameters around folders and structure in your drive environment. Even if a team drive is not shared with anyone, the information continues to be retained. So admins can come here to identify if there are any quotes around this dead team drives that aren't shared with anyone and decide how to handle those. Often just retaining that information is fine. But if you do want to add in team members that should have access to that information, this is how you would go about that. The other thing that the Team Drives Manager in the admin console enables you to do is actually manage the settings for your individual team drives. So for example, if we want to set a rule to prevent full access members from modifying the settings of a team drive, aka only admins can manage the settings for the team drive, we can do that. We can turn off external sharing. We can turn off sharing with non-members. So even internally, if we want to restrict a certain set of sensitive documents to only be shared with HR or even just with the exact specific team members that we share out to, this is the setting that we would want to select to do that. This, by the way, overrides what I mentioned earlier from the end user standpoint, which I mentioned that we can go in and share a file individually. Using this setting, you would not be able to do that. You would not be able to grant additional permissions to non-members of that team drive. And then I mentioned earlier on that we have the capability to create a protected team drive. That's what this download, copy, print setting allows us to do, is actually prevent commenters and viewers from downloading, copying, and printing, so they can't replicate, make a copy, or even go in and highlight text and copy out. So there's definitely that great tool available there to prevent that sharing out. And I did see there's a couple more questions coming in about managing, controlling, seeing team drive limits, as well as seeing contents within a user's My Drive. Definitely will be able to address those. Very briefly, from the standpoint of understanding when you will hit the team drive's limits. That's a great point. There are some limitations around team drives. They're not, in most use cases, they're not very heavy limitations. They tend to be things like your folder and subfolder depth. You can only go down 30 or 20 or 30 layers of some folders. I think it's 30. From a file upload standpoint, each team drive can only upload 750 gigabytes per day. These are limitations that can affect your end users, and we're happy to go in to address those in one-off cases to see what the best practice is there. Examples of that would be for drives that are going more than 30 subfolders deep, creating new team drives or separate folder hierarchies in My Drive for those use cases. For the file upload limits, if you have design teams that reach those limits, you can actually upload more than 750 gigabytes. Google will not cancel an upload in progress. So you just need to be cognizant of who is updating what on each day when those larger files need to be synced. So definitely we are aware of those. Google is working on their notifications in the admin alert center to be able to flag things like when you're approaching those limits. Today, there's not really a way to yield that information without, as an admin, granting yourself access to all of the team drives and then manually checking from the team drive side. So unfortunately, not a great solution today, but that is getting built out over time. So not a great solution to that specific use case, but for, I would say, 95 to 99% of use cases, that should be pretty well addressed. And then another question was, what happens if I move a folder into a team drive that is larger than 750 gigabytes? Am I able to check the status of that move? That's a great question. I would need to do a little bit of testing there and circle back to you on that one. I'm actually not sure. I think that there's a separate API limit for transfers rather than uploads, but I'm not 100%. So I'll need to get to circle back on that one. Great question. Thank you for adding that in there. Perfect. So driving the conversation forward a little bit, I'm going to go back into my presentation here. And I do want to talk a little bit about offline usage of G Suite and of Google Drive. So the first thing I want to plug here is the Google Drive file stream. If you're not using the Drive file stream today, we really, really recommend it. If you have any users that prefer not to use the web interface, or if you support Microsoft file editors, Word, PowerPoint, and Excel. Drive File Stream gives you a local drive on your computer that allows you to navigate your My Drive file and folder structures, as well as your Team Drive file and folder structures from your local file explorer. So on Windows, that's the Windows Explorer. On Mac, that's the File Explorer, or just Explorer. So you can actually navigate your drive using this. And it is truly a drive file stream. It stores the structure, the hierarchy, the metadata, and then actually allows you to do things like double click a file and open with your native editor. And when you do double click a file, it streams it down at that point. Or if you need to make files available offline, you can right click and flag for offline usage. Drive File Stream is really, really good. We're seeing great adoption, really positive results from the marketplace. There are a couple of limitations around how that drive is set up on your machine. For example, the data that's cached as offline is automatically cached on your primary or your operating system drive on your machine. That's a little bit annoying for some use cases, especially if a lot of data is being synced offline. It can lead to limitations. But overall, Drive File Stream, again, excellent in virtually all use cases for offline usage. There is a legacy tool available out there called the Google Drive Backup and Sync. And I really want to specify here that this one is not recommended. Backup and Sync does have the benefit of allowing you to capture a specific folder or set of folders on a machine and have those sync to your Google Drive on the web. But it doesn't actually support team drives, and the limitation of scheduling syncs for bulk data leads to all sorts of problems around getting access to the newest version of the data, bandwidth limitations. It really is a legacy solution. It's still supported for certain use cases that aren't addressed by the Drive File Stream, but for the most part, Drive File Stream is what your users should be using today. Here's just a quick comparison chart, and as is apparent on that comparison chart, this is from the Admin Help Center, by the way, so you can always reference back later. The Drive File Stream supports Team Drive and Backup and Sync doesn't. Drive File Stream supports streaming files down rather than doing a scheduled sync, which is favorable for virtually every connection and most use cases. The Drive File Stream supports syncing individual files instead of flagging folders. Also supports real-time presence in Microsoft Office. So you can see when people are editing a Microsoft Office document using Drive File Stream. Backup and Sync allows you to sync other folders, so it doesn't just use a G drive on the machine. It allows you to flag which folders you're syncing, and does support Google Photos, which Drive File Stream doesn't. So that's kind of the quick version, but Drive File Stream, thumbs up, yes, big smile. Backup and Sync, probably would not recommend in most use cases. Perfect. So jumping ahead, this is the kind of the last component to our main part of the presentation here. I want to talk a little bit about using Google Groups to manage your team drives permissions. This is a best practice that is actually borrowed from Google Cloud Platform and developers' kind of model of granting minimum viable access to applications and servers and things like that. And it turns out that it just works really, really well in the team drives environment as well. So basically what I'm talking about here is using Google Groups from the admin console to create your identity and access management lists, and then sharing your individual team drives out by sharing to a group. And then when you add and remove people from that group, they automatically get granted or removed from access from the team drives that group is assigned to. So from an admin standpoint, it's really not too difficult to set up a new group. From the admin console home, we're looking for the groups section. It might be hidden under more controls if you haven't dragged it out. Groups gives you a list of your existing groups and allows you to configure new ones. I'm actually just going to leverage a current group that I already have here called sales. when you're managing the group, you can add members to that group. You can set permissions around the group details and settings for identity and access management. So if I were configuring this group, and I'm actually going to do a quick resize on my window here. Apologies if that did anything wonky to the webinar. But when we're editing our permissions here, we actually can turn off the ability to publish posts. So if you already have groups set up for your different departments and teams and things like that, you actually can go in and use those groups to set permissions around team drives without configuring any new ones. But if you wanted to create new groups that were specifically for team drives permissions, all you have to do is turn off that ability to publish posts, and you can very simply use that group specifically for identity and access management. Now, once you have your group established, once you've set the specific members who should be a part of that group, it's very, very easy from the team drive level or from the admin console manage team drives to go in and assign the group to the team drive itself. At the level of permission that you want. Let's say I have a team member who is a part of this group, but I want to give them higher access. I can also share to that user directly and escalate their access. So there's not a limitation there. But when I share out to the group, it's very simple, very easy. That group gets a notification that they have access to this team drive. And then as people come and go from our organization, we don't need to go team drive by team drive adding people in. We just need to identify certain classifications of employees and add them to their corresponding groups. And then their team drives will share out automatically. So depending on what workflows you use today to provision out your groups, whether you have an Active Directory or a single sign-on, or if you do things manually, this should simplify the process for sharing people their information when they come on board quite a bit if you're not leveraging groups already. With an eye on the time, I'm going to move pretty quickly here and start getting to some of these questions. I did want to touch very briefly on kind of a use case of the month. In this case, the one that I'm going to go into is the Explore function in Google Sheets. Just as a quick note here, that Explore function is available in Google Slides, it is available in Docs, and it does different things in each of those applications. But what I really want to show here is how easily you can visualize and analyze data using Google Sheets with that Explore function. So heading into kind of my sample document here, and very briefly, this document is great for sampling Explore because it has a lot of different kinds of info. Column A is all dates, column B is all custom fields, column C is all numbers, and column D is a fixed set of custom fields. So it's going to have really common results since it has to conform to that format. What I can do with Explore is I can select either my entire document or specific columns that I want to analyze more or in greater detail. And then I can click Explore down in the bottom right corner to find out a little bit more about my document. A really common use for Explore is to generate pivot tables. So if I wanted to see the number of unique activities that are generated each day, Explore is automatically going to generate that for me. And I can insert a pivot table and have it create a new tab that I can pop out or address in my preferred way. But Explore just makes it really, really easy to do that. In fact, you can even ask questions of your data if there are specific fields that you want to dive deeper into to analyze the data that's in your spreadsheets. Google Sheets truly is a data analytics tool, and Explore is a big part of that functionality. And then resetting my Explore window here, one of the really cool things about Explore is that it pre-generates visualizations for you. So with this daily activity tracking document in mind, I want to see what percentage of time was spent in each category of activities. There's actually already a visualization generated for me. When I click and drag that out, I can see the exact percentages that were spent in each subject area. And then I can even, for example, move this to its own spreadsheet, copy it to another spreadsheet for analysis, visualization, presentation, move it into a Google slide. Really useful tool for quickly and easily visualizing data without needing to be a data scientist or even a power user in spreadsheets. Anyone can use Explore to yield insights on their data. So really, really cool feature there. Strongly recommend adopting. That being said, again, I ran a little bit over on the Team Drive section, so I'm going to go ahead and jump into questions. So I'm going to go ahead and just leave kind of this slide up in front of everything while I start to address some of the questions that I didn't have a chance to get to. So we're wrapping up here. Please submit questions, and we will send out the recording as well. If you have any other team members who would benefit from this content, let us know. So from Henry, would you please also share the path to get G Suite certification? That's actually a great question. Today, Google is only offering a certification for end users. So there is actually a course outline online. I believe there's a Coursera course associated with that. And there is a proctored test you can take to become G Suite certified as a user. That does touch on how to use Gmail and Drive, DocSheet Slides, Sites, kind of all of the tools, Hangouts, Meet, and Chat, all of the tools that a primary Office user would leverage. So it's not really admin level. I think Google's planning to announce an admin level certification later this year. I've not heard that from Google directly, but in previous years they have one of those, or they have had those types of certifications available. So there's probably something in the backlog that's going to come to light soon with regards to admin certifications. Will Google ever provide granular permission in Google Team Drives as far as folder structures? Yes, this is intended to be added to Team Drives later this year. Regarding the file stream app in Windows 10, will the local cache improve so that I don't have to clear it every couple of months? Over time, the syncing seems to stop working and the local cache needs to be flushed, and then after logging in, it seems to work again. That's a great question, and part of what I pointed to about some of the limitations around Drive file stream and where and how it actually caches your information. The answer is kind of. Yes, it is being supported and improved upon and iterated all the time. I'm not actually aware of any specific updates that are scheduled for Drive file stream caching, but it is a part of the core kind of G Suite services. So we could always take that offline and help you to reach out to Google's product team to get a more firm answer there if that's useful. So definitely reach out if you are interested in walking down that path to get a little bit more detail there. Is Google allowed to collect and/or access use of any of the AI gathered to help employee productivity, et cetera, for purposes outside of your company's tenant? The only example of that I can think of is if any information was subpoenaed by a government actor, and then after Google's legal team pushed back as much as was legal, if they were required to produce some sort of information, maybe. That's a fairly complex use case, so I'm not really sure if that would ever really be used. Generally speaking, Google's information is sanitized before employees have access to it. In the rare case that it's not sanitized, that there are very strong information management policies in place at Google. Google is a data company, and they take data privacy probably more seriously than virtually any other company out there. They don't share with third-party vendors. They don't share outside of the core functionality that is agreed to in your G Suite terms of service. So the short answer is not really, but there are some more complex and deeper answers to that. We can definitely sync with the Google security team for a more detailed answer, but the materials I would actually recommend reading through are the G Suite terms of service, which do include privacy information. the G Suite transparency report that's published each year that talks about how your data might be accessed, when it was accessed, things like that. And then the G Suite security white paper is available online. It's actually designed to be read by admins to actually, in an understandable, non-legalese way, to understand how Google's policies are in place. So you actually can see how Google goes about that information management there. Happy to follow up, by the way. If you shoot us an email or schedule a consult, we can always send over that information for you. How do you move from Windows-based mapped drives to Google Team drives? Can they sync with on-prem file servers? Not yet. They actually will be able to sync with on-prem file servers later in the year. We would rely on doing a data migration to approach this use case today. So we would be saying your users are now going to use Team drives as their primary use case. We would leverage a migration tool to actually bring over all of your data, including the file folder structure, the permissions, and then set up new external link sharing and things like that. Unless you move everything to Team drives, I can imagine getting users to switch from Windows mapped. I think that's probably, I can't imagine getting users to switch from Windows mapped drives to Google Team drives, depending on the project they're working on. I imagine it can be difficult. Training and change management is definitely a part of deploying Team drives. Google has a learning center for Team drives that actually goes through how to get used to using that tool. And what we're noticing is that adoption is really good once users get started on Team drives. So just as we're short on time here, I don't have a ton of time to go into more detail on that. But what we're seeing is that organic transitions are okay, where you allow users to use whichever solution they prefer, and people do tend to prefer Team drives once they start using it. But you're right that we would recommend probably doing a larger kind of migration from a traditional file structure into Team drives from that aspect. What governance? So we're running over on time here. I am actually going to keep going to address all of the questions. So thank you to everyone who joined us today. No offense taken if you have to jump early. If you did ask a question and you can stay a couple of extra minutes, please do. But just kind of forging on ahead here. What governance is available for internal only sharing? You should have that regardless. So yeah, you can set the state of a Team drive to be internal or internal and external. You can set limitations about whether or not non-members can be shared out to that Team drive. There's pretty good governance available for that. So I would recommend going through the documentation in the Help Center or again, scheduling a consult, and we can talk you through that as well and answer more specific questions. I've already addressed the question about Team drive limits. Is there any way to see the contents inside a given user's My Drive? This is actually an excellent question. We wouldn't actually use the admin console for that. We would leverage Google Vault, which is also included on the G Suite Business and Enterprise versions. So if you have Team drives, you have Vault available to you. And Vault is where we would go to actually search through individual user data. Vault does give you a domain-wide search engine across your user information, which is a very powerful tool. And for that reason, it's highly audited. So that your admins can see, your super admins can see whenever anyone accesses any of their users' data, what they searched for, what they looked into. And that's a really critical piece of that data access puzzle. So the way we would go about that, the way we would go about seeing contents in a given user's My Drive would be with Vault. And there are some pretty strong security implications for how we would go about that. When I turn on prevent users in Chrome from creating new Team drives, even the super admins cannot create new Team drives. That is correct. That is, it sounds like you're setting that at the domain-wide level. We would need to set that permission structure at the, or we would need to create an OU for the super admins to be able to create new Team drives, basically, to override that. What happens if I move a folder I already addressed? And then thanks, Henry, for the shout out. I hope this was all useful to everyone. Again, I know we ran over here. Apologies, I'll do better on time management for future webinars. But thanks everyone so much for the time. Really appreciate the questions. They're very engaged and very good questions. Let us know or by email if you're already a Dido customer, or by reaching out to the URL here if you have any other questions. We'll send out the recording shortly. And thanks everyone so much for attending our webinar. See you next month.